Another way to create variety is through the use of what we call dominance and emphasis. Dominance, of course, means that something is greater than something else, that it basically rules over something else. And the idea of dominance in design is in quantity, not in scale. So it's a very important understanding. Something being larger than something else doesn't mean that it's dominant except in scale. In the design, the dominance is the greater proportion or the greater quantity of occurrence. And so as we look at this design, this page layout, we notice that this screened pattern, this kind of grid screen pattern, is recurring over and over again pretty much throughout the design. Then there is a yellow field that also occurs, so it's a color dominance. And these are occurring to a greater degree than the gray, the white, or the other color. So the type is not dominant. The rectilinear shapes in the circle are not dominant. These elements are emphatic. What is dominant is the yellow and the screen shapes. So again, it's a matter of quantity or greater proportion makes something dominant. So within a pattern, obviously, you're going to have dominant elements. And if it's a pattern that is a direct repeat of a shape, that shape will be dominant. Sometimes you will have secondary shapes within a pattern, or shapes that are equal in dominance to other shapes, and so the combination of those in the pattern will create a sense of dominance, and then the contrast to that is emphasis. Unlike the idea of concentration and dispersion, dominance and emphasis require each other. You don't have to have emphasis when you have dominance. So if you just have a straight polka dot pattern, that's what dominates over the entire picture plane. But in order to have emphasis, you have to have dominance, because one emphasis cannot exist without the presence of dominance. So if all of this were just the screened pattern and there weren't any type and rectilinear shapes, then we would have nothing but dominance. And we don't have the understanding of dominance, but it wouldn't help create a sense of variety unless we actually include emphatic areas. Dominance can occur in terms of color, in terms of direction, in terms of shapes, in terms of lines, in terms of certain patterns going on. And then emphasis would be a natural or intelligently contrived break from the dominance. As we look in this photo, we notice a couple of things. The psychological line of everybody but the man in the center is going toward the left, so that's a dominant line of sight, a dominant psychological line. The color, the orange color, dominates. The darker gray color here dominates, and because of the direction, because of the color, and the basic overall idea that everybody's doing the same thing in this image, helps create emphasis on this guy who is not joining with these guys, but his attention is caught somewhere off screen, outside of the picture plane. So he is the emphasis in the midst of this dominance. When we look at a page layout such as the New York Times, we notice type. The typographic columns and the paragraphs and so forth are dominant. That allows the masthead to emphasize and the images and captions and headlines to emphasize. So you can have several different types of emphasis within a design and a couple different types of dominance. In this case, again, the typographic columns are dominating and everything else are different issues of emphasis. When you have one specific thing that stands out, amidst a dominant element or within a pattern, that becomes what we call an anomaly. An anomaly does not disunify. It still works within the idea of dominance, but it's a specific kind of emphasis that occurs once in a design. And in this magazine spread, this ad for Dodge, obviously the dominant is the green and the clover shapes, and the emphasis is the red clover, which is about as different in color from green as you can get. And it also has 4 leaves instead of 3, and therefore the idea of Dodge being different from the competition and standing out from the crowd is iterated just in the idea of dominance, emphasis, dominance of shape and color versus emphasis of shape and color. So an anomaly is a single occurrence of emphasis. Emphasis otherwise can occur several times within a design in a variety of ways, as we saw with the New York Times layout. Here in this 2-page spread, we have the kind of bird's eye view looking straight down on the stadium seats. One of them is open. That's an anomaly. And we focus right in on that. Anomalies use the Gestalt principle of similarity really well. And even emphasis will, to a point, but when you have recurring emphases or something that is emphatic within a design, can occur several times within a design, it's not as striking as an anomaly is. And so anomalies really illustrate the idea of the Gestalt principle of similarity, meaning that we fuse everything or group everything that is similar, and then what is different can stand out. So this ad uses the proximity, or pardon me, the similarity and the sense of anomaly to make its point. This was a infographic, and obviously the anomaly is making a strong historic statement. We don't even need words in this to make the point. The anomaly is so strong. Just a couple examples of emphasis in use. In the magazine cover, again, looking at another issue of Baseline, we have a very enlarged line drawing of a character in black against a red background. And so the red is dominant, the black becomes emphatic because it is different from the red. There's less of it. It's a linear element on a red ground. And then the anomaly is the masthead. You can have an anomaly and emphasis as well as dominance. You don't need to have just an anomaly in a design. You can have dominance, emphasis, and the anomaly going on. Here on the business card on the front side, we obviously have the dominance of gray. We have the emphasis of the white knockout type and the anomaly of the orange accent. Another way to create emphasis is the idea of elaboration, which means that there is a gradual change going on, or an embellishment of a certain stated visual idea. And so in these linear elements, we have basically things coming in from the side, and they're rather wide, and then they narrow down and pinch. And then as they change direction around the curve, they move back out, but they're doing something different than what they're doing over here, yet there's unity. We notice that continuity, that flow of line, and so we're actually, because of the change in interval and the gradation that's going on here, we notice this becomes an emphatic area because it's pinching, and it's the point at which the direction changes and the relationship of these linear elements also changes in terms of their intervals and their width. So this transitional area is elaborating. And so we're starting with a theme, we're creating a variation, and then moving into a different theme. This is another pattern that uses line, and uses line in a sort of informally structured understanding to create a pattern that has a sense of visual texture to it. We understand a sense of surface and tactility, touchableness in this pen and ink drawing, or it might be just, fine line marker. But notice the elaboration, it fades toward the top and disappears. Here is a lot of elaboration in use, and in fact in this two-page spread the elaboration becomes so strong, the pattern becomes so strong that we almost lose the anomaly of the vehicle and the text boxes and so forth. In fact, we see this before we see this. So we have a lot of dominance on the elaboration going on, and we have almost competing anomalies here. This is more of an anomaly than this because this still maintains most of the color of the background pattern. So what we would do then is make this the anomaly, and this would be an emphatic area. Dominance, emphasis, concentration, dispersion are contrasting ideas. Remember that with concentration, dispersion, you don't need one to understand the other. With dominance, you don't need emphasis necessarily, but to have emphasis you require dominance, and anomaly requires dominance as well. And an anomaly, an emphasis versus dominance, that's a contrast issue. That is a difference, how things are different rather than similar. Another way to create emphasis is through different shape. And so these motifs are from the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, and the dominant shapes are the kind of wave-like shapes, and then the contrast of shape gives us, or is in the human forms, the athletes themselves. We can create emphasis by going a different direction than we've generally established. And in this fortune cover from a while ago, the overall stress is vertical in this, and then we have a strong diagonal sense. We have a secondary horizontal in here, but what really gets emphasized is the horizontality of the masthead and the date line, and the horizontal rectangle here. It is a little bit isolated from the rest, but it is going a different direction than the diagonal and the vertical. Diagonals are repeated, the verticals are repeated, and the horizontal actually really stands out. So you've got a very striking cover, but your eye is going to pick up the masthead fairly quickly, and that's a good thing because generally you want to be able to understand Fortune as opposed to Forbes, as opposed to GQ, as opposed to Good Housekeeping. So you want your masthead to be somewhat prevalent or somewhat understandable when you're dealing with publication design. Another way to emphasize in contrast is using scale. And this is from a type setting machine from a while ago, back of course before computers. But notice the smaller letters and the numbers are all the same size, and they're working in, of course, contrasting color. Color is switched, figure ground understanding, colors reversed, to understand to be able to quickly see the numerals versus the letter forms. But notice that the name of the linotype machine, the metal typer, is larger, so that is emphasis by scale. So that we know that this is not a weight machine or some other option. We can create emphasis by changing up texture. And in this two-page spread, we've got hair texture, and then we got the root perfect, and we are contrasting that product against the texture of the hair. And so we are emphasizing, we're putting the product itself in the environment, which has the repetitive pattern, the texture to it, and so forth, and then changing this out. And also, although the kind of color gradation works in the red band, in the red bar at the bottom, the texture also stops, so that we have the smooth red surface versus the roughness of the hair and the linear direction of the hair. And then this becomes very much contrasted in terms of texture, because it's doing something entirely different in terms of surface quality. We can also emphasize by changing up color. So in this ad, we are emphasizing the shoes, the black shoes. The achromatic is emphasized over the warm chromatic colors that are going on. Remember that contrast is degree of difference between something. When you compare something, you're looking at how things are alike. When you're contrasting, you're looking at how they're different. And so the greater sense of contrast, the greater difference there is between things in your design. That, remember, goes all the way back to our first project, where you were to create the contrast via pattern versus order and chaos. Another way to create contrast is through the idea of simplicity versus complexity, and we've touched on that a little bit here and there throughout the quarter. But as we look at this piece, we have a lot of complexity, a lot of random value patterning and surface sense going on with the bottoms of the boots, and all the bugs and foliage and stuff that's going on in here, versus areas that are simple and therefore allowing the framing of the two guys in the image. And so we have the complex area and the darker area versus the less textured, more simple area, which is also lighter. Usually you're going to have more than one contrast issue going on to help you create emphasis. It can be color, it can be direction, it can be pattern and texture, and so forth. So you can have simple patterns versus more complex patterns, and that will create emphasis by how you contrast things. So, this is from the Quicksilver website, and what do you see here in terms of pattern? What do you recognize? What's dominant? What's emphatic? Is there concentration? Is there dispersion? Is there a sense of visual texture? And also, is this unified?